Wow. Yeah, kind of a big bandy kind of.
I mean, arguably, it's pre-funk.
It is definitely too loud. Had to do a switcheroo there because, Owen, that music was just too loud.
Yeah, these things happen.
That's right. Welcome to ThursdAGE, everybody. This is what we call the pre-funk.
And why do we call it the pre-funk?
That's what I call it. I mean, you can call it. What would you call it?
The show.
The show.
I mean,
in sort of a broad strokes, yeah, for sure.
It's a little after 4 o'clock my time. People can hear me. That's a show.
That's right. That's all you need. Just a pinch of this and a pinch of that, and keeping helping a dollop even of Owen Casey Stevens. Look at you.
Yeah, that looks like a dollop. It's definitely.
I like that word dollop.
Dollop, pinch, dash. These are all lovely non-specific things that mean if you get it wrong, it's because you don't know how much a dollop is.
That's right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, so hot off of our prior programming where we discussed the trials and tribulations, concerns and challenges and opportunities of being an independent tabletop role play developer, and it's kind of this interesting cross section that we find ourselves in because we both work for Green Ronin.
Yep,
Green Ronin, if you will, and I coordinate the Age Creators Alliance and work with folks who publish under that license.
Yep.
And then you have your own independent studio.
Yeah. I'm the president and publisher of Rogue Genius Games, which is just 3 people. So, mostly that's me.
Right. And so, looking at that whole kind of scenario, we are just lousy with independent developer money.
Yes, in that independent developers have no money.
Yeah, it's kind of lousy. But yeah, no, absolutely. And it is a labor of love. There are, one of the things that I've enjoyed over our years of doing this together is that you are a wealth of knowledge and if it's happened out there in the world, you have pretty much experienced it. Right?
Well, or I sat around and talked to someone who has. That's
fair enough. Yeah.
One of the great secrets to learning things, I think in general, but also especially in this industry, is to find someone that has successfully done the thing you want to do, and then, be quiet and listen to them, or buy them lunch, or say nice things about them online so that they let you into their secret Discord, or every person in every community has their own way to sort of get inside the circle of trust. Way back in the 90s, I went to a convention with a friend of mine, Carl, that had Aaron Alston, who's a sadly passed brilliant game designer and fiction writer who happened to live a state adjacent to my state and would therefore show up at conventions a lot. And this was before I was published. Maybe I had a magazine article out, but I think it was before anything was published. And we happened to see him, Aaron Alston, just hanging out in the lobby at one point, and my friend Carl said, "Hey, follow my lead." And so we went up, and Carl said, "Mr. Alston, can we take you out to lunch?" And apparently we did not look like psycho killers because Aaron Alston said, "Sure, love to." And so we took him out to lunch, and we asked where he wanted to go. And ultimately, because it was near the convention center, he just wanted to go to a Wendy's. So for the cost of a square hamburger, we got to chat with Aaron Alston for a solid hour and a half.
Now, for the uninitiated.
Yeah.
Who is Aaron Alston?
Aaron Alston, as I said, he's sadly passed, but he was a brilliant game designer and writer and novelist who did just a magnificent. He did a lot of stuff with Steve Jackson Games. He was involved in Auto Duel and Superheroes, and he did a setting called Strike Force. If you look up Aaron Alston, you will find a lot of people saying nice things about him, and he did some really early things that are now sort of considered standard, but at the time were cutting edge, because that's what happens when it's cutting edge and good and influential. It becomes normal. Um, but the real point of the story is that he was happy to hang out with a couple of nobodies for the cost of a cheeseburger. Maybe it was a bacon cheeseburger, right? We would have splurged for him. But now I would not take someone out to lunch in an enclosed building right now because COVID, and other people have to make their own choices. And the internet was only a way to play, text games where you are an ASCII character at the time that we did this. But
Right.
um, the core concept that we found an environment with a professional and we're willing to accommodate his needs so that it would be convenient for him to talk and for us to listen, that remains a great way to gain information about the industry.
Right. No, so and this sort of take you out to lunch gambit is that's like a very viable kind of thing that, I mean, I think it's the tension between like, oh, should I bug them? Should I, whatever? And by and large, if you're not sort of obnoxiously sort of exuberant, or maybe even then, I don't know. But the idea being, ask, invite, engage, do the thing, because that's your shot.
And if they're on social media, it is not unusual for someone to do like an Ask Me Anything on Twitter or on Reddit. Uh, the whole point of an Ask Me Anything is that they're opening themselves up to answer questions. If you
Oop, we lost your audio. There we go. It's back.
You can hear me.
Yeah, now we can. Yeah.
If you want to do the equivalent of buying them lunch and don't want to get in together in person, see if they have a Patreon, see if they have a Ko-fi account, whatever. I have had people say, "Hey, Owen, I was just thinking about how much I appreciated your stuff. Here's $5 for your Ko-fi account," and I'm like, $5? That's more than one large drink, right? I will remember that person's name. Now, am I saying pay your creatives just because I'm one of them and I will benefit from it? Yes, I am. I am saying that. But I mean, I've got people whose Patreons I support and back. I've got people that I get onto social media and boost their stuff, engage
Yeah.
with them. If they're doing a little game, right? If someone says, "Hey, we're going to do James Bond movie titles, but we're going to tone them down a little bit. Instead of No Time to Die, it's Hey, can we hurry up and get me killed by 5 o'clock? I've got a thing at 6." Then when you engage with them, you can. It's a long game, but it's getting in and getting to be someone they know is not a creeper and is not annoying. And Stan Brown notes that see if they have an hourly consultation rate. It's probably more than the cost of lunch, but they'll probably be even more talkative. Yeah, I do formal consultations, and it is expensive compared to other things. But that is an opportunity for you to send me specific questions of material, me go over it, and have a specific, focused on exactly you and your issues
Oh,
conversation.
I like the distinction because I think it's important. One of the things that is difficult when you are an independent developer, and first, I also want to say hello to D, hello to Duke. Good to see you. Stan says, I like lunch, and I like lunch with Stan. Always a good time. So welcome and thanks for hanging out with us. Um, there is this moment that every indie developer, indie anything really, when you're embarking on a thing on your own, that you wrestle with the, am I real? Am I doing it? Should I, is my time valuable? And that imposter syndrome kind of sets in, and sometimes at differing, volumes and levels of intensity, mostly when you're just about to do the really important thing and you're like,
Yeah.
why am I doing this? I shouldn't be doing this. But the reality is respecting your time and their time and recognizing when the conversation is turning into or is more of a consultation, a recognition of that goes a long way.
Absolutely. I think that's an important factor. The other thing is, um, consider how big an ask you're asking and what your relationship is, right? Like if Troy and Stan go out to lunch, they might just be hanging out with friends, but they also might both want to pick the other's brain about some specific detail, and that is an exchange of expertise and information. Uh, Whereas if you're talking to someone and you're like, hey, can I ask you if this 16-page RPG core rulebook seems like it's a good idea? That is a big ask, right? That's absorbing 16 pages of information. That's not saying, hey, I've got this an idea where you roll 2 7-sided dice, and if you get 2 sevens, the game ends. Is that a good idea, right? That's a quick, simple thing where it's pretty straightforward to say no. Also, if you're asking someone questions in that kind of informal environment and their reaction is, you should go buy this book over here. Yeah, that's covered in the Kobold game book of world building, or that's in a theory of fun by a well-known game designer. Don't be annoyed that you're being directed to go do your own research. They are saving you the time by telling you what research was
And that's a
useful and
gift.
informative of them.
Yeah, and I found too, when you are connecting with somebody who is, let's say, a couple tiers above you in your craft, and to sit down and have the dialogue first, people enjoy that. They really do. I mean, I enjoy sharing my expertise as it relates to things like Duke was talking about my OnlyFans. Um, it's a real delight. Uh, let's see how into detect. Let me just make your dice.
So Technomages have not made my dice. Now, I am actually dice making is one of the areas where I do not have a great deal of expertise, but I do have 7-sided dice and 11-sided dice and 13-sided dice, because Impact Miniature has those dice. And at one point when I was talking to the owner of Impact Miniatures at a convention, I'm mentioning that I really sort of liked the idea of a 7-sided die, because sometimes as a D20 designer, I want a sword to do more than a D6 and not as much as a D8. He literally said, hey, I will give you a full set of my weird-sided dice if you will feature them in an article. So
Nice.
that was me getting some free stuff, but it was also me then being challenged to put my mouth where my money was,
Yeah, yeah,
or could have been.
yeah.
And I learned something about the math and the numbers behind weird-sided dice. So there are opportunities frequently, and it was the start of a relationship, right? I'm now on a first name basis with this person, so I can
Right.
chat back and forth with them. Look for the opportunities to engage with people if you want the opportunity to learn from them.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I like weird dice too. Duke enjoys a weird die, and they have really innovated in the weirdness of late. I'm particularly a big fan of those different shapes and flat dice, and just
Yep.
I love it. Um, so yeah, so talk a bit about, like, so one of the challenges you are, as an independent developer. We kind of talked about some of the, we talked about a lot of stuff, and also folks with questions, feel free to drop them in chat, and we will tackle them. But when you look at things like getting over sort of that the hump of like, should I be here? And there you are, here you are, and uh, talk a little bit about, where do you pull your inspiration when you're running on an empty tank?
Um, so I think everybody, I mean, I can talk about where I pull my inspiration from, and I'm happy to do that. And I will here in a sec. But I want to open with, what fills your tank may be very different from what fills my tank. And this is getting perilously close to being an inappropriate analogy. But my point is, if people are telling you, hey, go read a book, and you find reading a book to be exhausting and annoying, and you only do it if you have no choice, then that advice is probably not tailored to you. Although if they say, go read a book, especially try books about uh, ancient research into the kind of area you're interested in. I wrote a good chunk of a city book, and I won't say which one, after reading L. Sprague's de Camp, Ancient Technologies or Ancient Cities, I don't remember the exact name of it, book, because it was nonfiction, but it was nonfiction that tied in directly to the sort of things that I wanted to get involved in. When I have an empty tank, I've got a number of ways that I like to recharge. One is to look at how much time do I have. If I am feeling like I've got an empty tank and this project does not have to be finished today, frequently I recharge by putting it down, walking away. Now, since I do this as a full-time or more job, frequently that means putting that project down and picking up another project. And I try and pick up something different. So if I'm writing an art order for one project and I'm outlining another, I may well be tired trying to think of new ways to say, there is a halfling with a rock pointed at you, and switch over to, hey, we want this adventure to touch on how tragic it is that no one is paying attention to the fact that 1 out of every 50 carrots is actually a sentient psychic vegetable, and people should be horrified to be vegetarians after reading it. This is obviously a ridiculous example, but also a lot of my joy of working on game products comes from playing game products. So I try and make sure any game system that I'm designing for, I want to be playing, I want to be running. For me, those are two different things. I like to play and GM, and I get different ideas when I'm doing those things. I like to spend time with my family and friends. I like to relax. All of that is in the not in a huge rush, can relax and sort of let the tank naturally absorb energy like solar panels. Sometimes instead, what I have to do is say, hey, how am I going to recharge? Well, I've got 5,000 more words to do in 4 more hours. And if it's not done, then it's not going to get finished. So in that case, recharging may well mean taking a walk along the block, taking a shower, slapping my face a few times, finding the most caffeinated beverage I think won't harm my health, and then sitting back down and setting a timer and saying, I'm going to work for 20 minutes, good or bad, no matter what, I'll do nothing but work, and then I'll take a 10-minute break, and then I'll work for 20 minutes, and then I'll do a 10-minute break. Those are all things that you have to work at and learn from yourself. For me, the most useful piece of advice as far as overcoming writer's block and refilling your tank and moving forward on your project is to remember that a little bit of progress is progress. Some days I've got mental health issues. I have depression. I've got some executive dysfunction. I can, some days I can't do much. If I can't do a lot, I try and do a little, because if you do a little, a bunch of days in a row, you have then done a lot. And those days are going to pass whether you're getting a little done or not. It is super easy. Like if you're trying to launch your first adventure and you're like, hey, I'm going to do a 100 encounter adventure. And then at encounter 7, you're like, wow, I've been working on this for a week. I'm going to take a break. And then if you don't get back to it and say, okay, I'm going to list 2 encounters and I'll work on 2, you can turn around and go, hey, it's been 90 days since I worked on this thing. Well, if you had decided on 1 room a day for 90 days, you would be just about done with deciding what all your encounters are, and then you could write them out.
Right.
Also, if you're early on and you're thinking, I'm going to do an 100 counter adventure, and after 7 encounters, you're out of ideas, if you're your own boss, and that's one of the great advantages of being a independent creative, it's possible that what you are actually doing is creating a 10 encounter adventure, and a good 10 counter adventure can be a great adventure, and then maybe you don't want to do 100 encounter adventures, or maybe you want to do them but later after you've gotten some feedback on your 10 encounter adventure, etc. So when you're shooting for other people's targets, you got to work on that. But it can be very, very useful to be aware, when can I adjust what my goal is? We've got some people putting in some great notes. Shadowcat mentions when working on things like mini paintings, they're singing along to Nightwish. And Stan follows up with, many people, including himself, have specific movies, music, games, and toys that tend to get you in a particular mood or headspace. I've got a playlist that is loud, fast, percussion-heavy music that if I caffeinate and put that on, I feel this drive to go forward, to do a thing, to accomplish something. Sometimes that will power me through a lull. Sometimes I'll put that on and I'll get a headache and throw my headphones across the room, and that can also be a data point. So
right. For me personally, I like to break out the Ouija board and summon some spirits, and then get a good poltergeist happening, and then I feel like I'm in my spot. Hey, I want to say hey to Jahanan over on Twitch coming in saying a bunch of Twitch. Fresh out the box. Right. I see that. So, okay. So, uh, you know, uh, when I was thinking about sort of how you fill your tank or, all of that, and you were kind of talking about, I don't want to get too much into creative process because we've covered that a lot in the past. But there is a practical, you got to get something done for sure.
Yeah.
And, sort of approaches to organization. I think everybody's got their own, unique, especially in tabletop, it sort of affords a bit of more of a creative approach to kind of getting things out the door. And the fact that it's been such it is a space, a creative space that has been a long time kind of brewing, and it's had some time to maybe set up some ancient sort of kind of habits. I think just primarily because it's as close to it's tabletop role play. The idea, its roots being it's a pen or it's a pencil, it's a piece of paper, and some um, you know rustic drawings of a monster. The We've talked a lot about organizing things, but I'm not speaking specifically to tools, but you're not just writing a book. You're kind of filling in these pieces that fit in sort of almost like a clockwork. If you really think about all of the moving pieces and the various things you've got to consider, how are you tracking all that as you're
So for really, really short things, and sometimes I'm doing products that are one page.
yeah.
I will literally sometimes for something that's super short, uh, a page, an article. Sometimes I do gaming content that is a tweet. I probably don't track it. I just put it out there, reread it, make sure that it makes sense, and hit full send. And if you follow my Twitter, you're aware how often I should have read it one more time because my spelling or grammar is atrocious.
Oh, but it's
Um,
great. I mean, I really highly recommend folks check that out. But like you tweeted, it was either today or yesterday about, the zombie. It was sort of like a story,
Yeah, that was a super, super, super short two-tweet short story that occurred at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, which is why you don't know if it was yesterday or today.
Right.
And what that was, just to jump back to the previous question a little bit, is that I was working on another project and my brain was just getting gunked up, geared slow, and stopping. So I literally hopped over to Twitter, forced myself to think of the first super short story I could, put it out, got myself in a different headspace, went back to work. And I do that a lot on social media.
Yeah.
For tracking longer things, I think you absolutely want an outline. And when you need an outline and how detailed that outline is going to depend a lot on you and your project. And if you're an independent, that's sort of all it depends on. It's not a bad idea to work for other people to see what their outlines look like, because you can steal those ideas for yourself as far as organization goes. But for example, if I'm doing an outline, I want to be able to say, okay, if in fact I am doing an adventure about the horrors of psychic carrots being eaten, then I've got to decide, when am I introducing the concept of psychic carrots? What am I putting in here so that vegans won't feel like I am personally attacking them? Right? Is this going to be a big cartoon project? Are the psychic carrots evil? Am I doing a riff on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes? And if so, how am I going to make that obvious? Then what is the course of the adventure? How do you defeat the psychic carrots? What happens if you try and talk to them? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And there's this huge difference, total difference. If we have a psychic carrot that looks like a cartoon that is leaping out of the ground with a big energy axe it's made with its mind, and farmers are going, and you put that on your cover, then people are going to go, oh, okay, this is clearly a joke, humorous product. Whereas if your psychic carrot is a gnarled, dark brown mandrake root that has a spider coming out of the top of it that is lifting it up out of the ground while runes are cast by shadows, people might go, hey, I think he really has a problem with psychic carrots, and this looks like it's supposed to be dark and gritty. And it's easy to miss details like that, right? So when I'm doing an outline, I like to try and say, hey, this is going to be a product like X. This is the tone we're going for. Here's an example of what we're doing.
How much time do
And
you take to sort of imagine or to create? Because you've got the boundaries that are present when it comes to the system that you're writing
Yeah.
for, right? I mean, that seems to me like another sort of plate to spin in the midst of all the psychic carrot sort of.
Well, I mean, one of your questions is, are you bound by the game rules? And if so, are you aware of it? And are you trying to work within those comfortable bounds, or are you trying to push the limits?
Yeah.
So, like, I'm not going to find, most likely, a game out there that has psychic carrots statted up. So one of the things I have to do is say, okay, how am I going to be representing psychic carrots? Also, how much effort am I going to put into representing psychic carrots? And the more ridiculous the idea, you can easily say, hey, this is going to be a game of psychic carrots. Use the stats for goblins. They are not worth the extra effort of having a whole new monster entry. You'll just describe it as a psychic carrot, and everything it does will have a psychic carrot tone to it. Proceed. But a lot of that, I think, you can be aware in advance you're trying to push the bounds of something, especially if you're doing something that's more rule focused. But let's say you're doing an adventure and let's say you're doing a fantasy age adventure for the age creators license, just as an example, and you specifically want this adventure to be about independent merchantmen on a merchant ship trying to turn a profit as they are sailing from port to port to port, and the trials and tribulations along the way. Okay, if those trials and tribulations are pirates attacking or having to negotiate with a hostile harbor master, etc., the rules pretty well cover that. The rules don't do a great job of telling you how do you simulate trade and buy low, sell high. That's just not, economy is not, generally speaking, fun for most adventuring parties, and it gets very little space in most RPGs. So if you are wanting to do that adventure, you need to look at, if that's an important element of my adventure, how are we going to represent that? And you can make that as simple as, hey GM, when running this adventure, everyone will make a test, maybe just a perception test. Maybe we'll put an extra specialty on it. Maybe it'll be based on your background. And if they roll this, they made this much profit. And if they roll that, they took that much of a loss. And we are not otherwise going to worry about it. Or you can say, okay, here are the 7 ports that we're going to have an adventure around. And we are specifically telling people that this is cheaper here than it is here. This is cheaper here than it is there. And by the way, this is how much you have to spend on food and scraping barnacles off your ship. And that's a decision. And when you make the outline is a great time to think about that decision, because those 2 different solutions take up a very different amount of space in your outline. And if you're wanting to do a 32-page adventure and you discover that you're pretty sure you're going to need 16 pages for your trade rules, then your trade rules aren't a good match for your adventure, especially in Fantasy Age, because you don't want half your product to be new rules. But I think in general, it's just as a good rule of thumb, people want as few new rules as possible to have the experience you want them to experience. And a lot of people are super excited about having those new rules for a new experience, but you just have to make sure that you are looking at, and again, I do it at the outline stage, how much of what barrier to entry am I putting on this? If my barrier to entry is a sidebar with a few tests that will allow you to have the experience of making or losing money, and you have a note that if someone has a clever idea, you can give them a +2 bonus to their check, and that covers it, and everything else is role-playing and getting on with the fun part of the adventure. The flip side of that is that I know some people who I dearly love who run a science fiction traders in space game where most of their game sessions are going over actual Excel spreadsheets of fuel costs for their starship and putting away money for retirement and their health insurance, and literally going over those numbers is more of their time than actually doing anything in character. And they love that game. I don't think I would love that game, but
right.
That is what they wanted. So I'm not trying to tell you that you need to have a specific proportion of rules to role play, to fight, or whatever. You just need to think about what it's going to be and who are you marketing this to.
I like it. Alex mentions use the stats for goblins. Yes, exactly. There's no need to reinvent the wheel each game. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the mastering the craft, honing your skill, is to understand when you want to push it a little bit and when you want to just sort of stay within the known, have some fun with it, but it frees you up to do the more, arduous stuff,
Yeah.
the heavier lifting.
And how good a fit is it, right? I mean, if we're specifically saying, it's an evil psychic carrot. It leaps out of the ground and attacks you, and it's doing pretty basic things. The flip side of that, just use goblins, is if we say, hey, it is a 72-foot long lightning breathing dragon, using goblin stats won't work for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, D mentions that trade tables in Travelers send their brain to mush. I'm not a math person myself.
Yeah, I mean, different people enjoy different games. We actually, I was talking about just using goblin stats for a carrot, and Stan reminded me of a piece of art, and you've got it too, that he did in a previous show that sort of speaks to that concept. So you might go look at where we get art from our friend Stan for something to throw up.
Absolutely. Duke mentions, I reuse stats a lot, throwing a certain special that sets it apart, and you're golden.
Yeah. And again, some game masters don't want to be told just use a goblin. They want to them, the fact that it's exactly the same as a goblin stat is a unfun element. So all of these decisions have consequences, and part of that is just you got to get in there, you got to do things the way you want them done as an independent, and then you see how that's reacted and whether you want to modify or you want to double down. Duke says psychic carrots get a stunt. They'll let carrots appear in your peripheral vision and distract you. Yeah, that's a great psychic carrot power.
Yeah, that is great. That is great. How do you kill a psychic carrot?
You julienne it.
Using a helicopter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see here. I'm going to that place where we go. That was way back, wasn't it? Did Stan resurrect it?
Yeah, Stan resurrected, and it's relevant to what we were just now talking. So
I like it. Yeah,
all ThursdAGE is better with Stan art. So I say we put it up.
Not to mention that it's sort of an exact example of why reinvent the wheel when you've done it already.
It is. It's absolutely true.
You have done it already. Let me 1 second. There we go.
As I allow the show to go into total silence rather than soft shoe while Troy is busy doing stuff, which someone suggested you kill carrots by drowning them in ranch, which I think is reasonable.
Oh yeah, I'd do that. Sure.
Hey, you're just a goblin stats with weird art, says the goblin.
Oh, who told you?
Yeah,
I like it. Wearing his fez.
Well, fezzes are cool.
They are cool. John and I talks about trying to reinvent the wheel too much, and sometimes the act of doing it and maybe not necessarily being successful or being as successful as you would hope, or finding that all the work that you did, you're like, okay, I got to put that up. You really never really throw anything away, right?
I never throw anything away, which is a problem. Because some of the things I don't throw away are physical objects that take up space. But when it comes to ideas and text, you can store a whole lot of bits of text in a nice, safe backup format like Dropbox. And I recommend it. That's another place where organization can be useful. But as an independent creative, if you're going in a direction with something and you're like, oh, I have now spent way too much time on these trade rules, I'm not going to use them. Don't delete them. Take those, carefully mark what they are, and put them in a folder, because someday you might even be working on a different game system. You might find that there's a whole group of merchant players league people that love that specific thing, and you're like, hey, didn't I have an idea like that? And you go back and you dig it up. So this is one of the reasons why everything that I put on social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, my blog, whatever, I back that up. I get it off those formats, and I try and organize it, and I put together monthly PDFs, which then I send to my higher tier Patreons.
Because I mean, honestly, the way that you utilize the very short sort of form venues like Twitter is kind of remarkable. It is. I can see you're sharpening your knives, like you're getting ready to, you're kind of throwing ideas out there and bouncing a whole bunch of stuff out. And it's really kind of the perfect venue for it, because it's a fun, interactive thing.
Yeah,
it's not permanent, but it also can be.
And like at one point I was doing spell tweets, was to try and write a first edition Pathfinder spell back when tweets were half the size and just that amount of space. So I
Right.
would say things like, it's the ice ball. It's like a fireball, except it does cold damage, but it's half the area. But if you fail your save, you also slip and fall on the ground. And I could stick that into that area. I got 330 of those written over the course of a couple of years, and I compiled them into 110 each and put them out as products.
I
So
love that economy of efforts, that idea that you are, it's all work. And if you're kind of, even if you're just sort of flexing a bit and sort of stretching and having some fun with stuff, it is something that in especially in this industry can be utilized and reused, and also a really great entree into conversation with people, and getting the engagement up. It's really sort of the very, I think that is incredibly sound advice and an important thing for folks to sort of really noodle on. Like, well, how are you using social media to both be engaging and fun, but then also a sort of what do they call that, a virtuous cycle, something that kind of leads to more. um let's see, Duke
uh,
says
uh,
nothing.
another advantage of it is that you can see what people are excited about, right? If
Oh,
you put
right.
out ideas on social media, you are building that engagement, which is an independent creative I find extremely useful. And there are people that do it different ways, and the algorithms are always changing stuff. So any advice I give you is from the time it hits my microphone to the time it reaches your ears, it may well be out of date. But if I put together something and I say, hey, here I did a short story that's about a noir flump, which I did. I can see if people go crazy over that. Okay, that's something I should put more effort into. Whereas if I think something is brilliant and fun and I put it out and everyone goes, that's feedback that at least the audience I'm currently reaching aren't excited about this thing that I was about to think of spending a bunch of time on.
Right. Duke mentions as well that you really want to have all the things that you do in a digital space, in the physical space. Like, you want to make sure it's safe, and it seems so basic, but boy, I'll tell you, the disaster has struck where entire manuscripts are lost. Uh, you
Absolutely.
know, yeah, yeah, heartbreaking stuff.
And
Uh,
while we're on it,
yeah.
when you have your text file and you're going to do whatever you do for layout, even if that's layout in Word or using someone's template, um, hold on to the text file and archive it someplace as your text file,
Yeah.
because there are a lot of products out there that exist in print or PDF that no one has the electronic text for anymore. That it was written, it existed at one point, but it just, because it's not the current iteration, it's been lost. And if you later are like, hey, I've written 3 of these, I can cut out these bits, jam them together, expand it with a 4th piece, and have a brand new product, you don't want to have to go strip all the words out of the PDF using a text reader, right? That's a pain.
Right, right.
Uh,
And how many great ideas have been sort of sidelined because the source file's gone? Yeah.
Absolutely. And Stan makes the point that for all of these, whether you are saving an idea or you're archiving points in something, um, make sure you name those files in a way that you can find them. And I've
Oh,
got a file
yes.
folder structure even, right? So I'm like, okay, so here are things for this game system, and under that, uh, here I've got work in progress, here I've got finished products, under finished projects, here I've got by category, and then I also back unfinished and work in progress. I've got old ideas, and just that way I can click through to where that list of things are. Stan also points out that he sometimes gets paid to transcribe things that have already been published. So that publisher is spending money to get him to create a new manipulatable text version of that thing.
Right, right. Yeah, and I'm thinking about the file naming stuff, and sometimes the things that I'm doing, it's a little different than, the development of a tabletop role play experience. But I can see that, if you are pushing up against a deadline, and you got to get something done. And even as an independent developer, you're still beholden to, like, how are you distributing it? What venues are, like, those are deadlines. And sometimes you are working with a partner. You got to make sure that you label it all, because if someone were to say, hey, Troy, could you tell me, could you give me all of the art that you've made for ThursdAGEs? And I'd be like, sure, here's the drive. And every file is going to be named like, a project number 80, so yeah. And so I kick myself on a regular basis. So great advice.
So do as we say, not as we do.
That's right. That's right. Duke says, plus pure text files, Markdown will always be readable no matter, if Word exists or not. That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. Technology just change. And we are, as an industry, embracing technology in ever increasing ways. As
Yeah.
VTTs begin to take even more of a hold, we've got the recent announcement of Roll20 and Drive-Thru RPG.
Yep.
So yeah, you definitely embrace a technology that is ubiquitous and and prepare for it to change.
Growing.
Yeah.
I mean, when I get into the game industry, no one was selling PDFs of games, right? When I got into the game industry, there was not Drive-Thru RPG or RPG Now. It's its main competitor, or no one was selling things on PDF.
Right. Right. And I also would imagine that transition was tough. Like, people are like, "Yay, PDFs! Of course, we're going to do this. We're excited."
There was a lot of debate about it, at the very least. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, I think that debate mostly ended when people realized that if you were putting out in print and you didn't make a PDF, some pirate would make a PDF and people would get the PDF, but now there was no chance you'd get paid for it. Whereas if you put out the PDF, at least there's some chance you'll get paid for it. Even then, there are companies that don't do PDFs. So it's
right.
I don't think it's debated a whole lot anymore. It'll flare. It's like a forest fire, right? Individual sparks are floating in the wind, and they may land in a dry patch. There'll be a flare up, and then it'll be put back out, and more sparks will go
out. D, what is a non-floppy disk? D says, when I did some stuff for another company, it was on a non-floppy disk.
Well, I mean, there were, for example, the 5 1/4 floppies, and then the 3.5 inch hard sides that were still.
Yeah, they're still a disc, but they just weren't as floppy as.
I mean, I've got, if I were to find it, I've got a thumb drive, right? A modern thumb drive that had 1/2 gig of memory that is this big and that thick.
Right.
Because at the time my wife was going to school and she needed to have art that she could put on this mobile external solid state drive. It's just that at the time that mobile external solid state drive was bigger than a Walkman.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And I was just I was going through some old stuff, and I have some old Lord British floppy disks, and I was just like, wow, these things are just, they're awful. So one of the things that we talked about, and I want to unpack a little bit more, is engagement and more on the self-promotion side. Like we got into in the last ThursdAGE, we talked about ads, and we talked about getting people to notice you, getting people to connect, and selling stuff. Oh, I do. Stan says, remember jazz drives. I do indeed.
Mm-hmm.
So the one of the things that I think maybe other people, other developers do this more or less, but I think that an uncharted territory for engagement and also great sort of contribution to the process is playtesting.
Playtesting can be important. Playtesting is playtesting can be an opportunity to connect with an audience, right? So you can, if you can get a hold of some people, say, hey, for social media purposes, I would like some people to playtest this product. Talk to me. I will send you a draft. You can also do playtests as like videos. Videos are big at the moment. The kids, they like them videos. So you could certainly do a short playtest online as a way to try and draw people in. I think we probably still get people that see Will Wheaton's Tabletop with Fantasy Age, and specifically Titan's Grave, which is his own whole show, that get excited and come to Fantasy Age because that's still out there. So that is a good opportunity for that. But playtest is also a good place to get feedback and possibly to find people who are excited by and want to work with you on similar projects. So I recommend playtesting, but just remember that a playtest is not just playing the game. A playtest is a stress test. It's kicking the tires rather than just getting in the car. You're wanting to see how does it handle on that's a bad analogy. I'm not going to go there. But for example, if you want to know how difficult is this encounter, you probably don't want to play it once with one group of characters, because exactly what selection those group of characters have made can influence whether they're able to get through this encounter or not. So, for example, again, if you're doing fantasy age or any age game, you might well want to say, okay, I want you all to play characters one level lower than this adventure is designed for. And then if it's a cakewalk for them, well, how about 2 levels lower? And if it's a cakewalk for them, then you can start to think, okay, and change up the mix, right? If it's fantasy age, say everyone play warriors or everyone play rogues. Let us see how this reacts to that. And on the flip side, if you run an encounter and the players are annihilated, if you get a TPK, you can say, okay, let's have you have one more player, or let's add another character, or let's you all have seen what choices you made and how it worked. Make new characters. Let's try this again and see how it works out.
So I was going to speak real quickly to the structure of playtests, and there are several, and I think that there are several levels and tiers of sort of the way that you can approach it. And I think that the testing process shouldn't be so arduous. Like, you shouldn't be like, okay, I've changed a paragraph, let's see how this,
No.
Yeah.
Although, if you've got multiple groups and you can take group through an encounter, and then you take their feedback, and then you take that encounter and you put it to a new group, whereas the new thing you've written goes to the first group, and that way you can shuffle stuff. Stan wrote, a playtest is putting the vehicle on a 1/4-mile track, not taking it on a road trip. And then he wrote, nah, you're right. Bad analogy.
Bad analogy. Yeah.
I actually think his analogy is better than mine was, but I still think it's not a great analogy.
I was going to say, when it comes to the playtesting, there, as the seasons of your project, you kind of walk through. There's you've got sort of new, that there's some things rough around the edges, or you just know that you don't know what's wrong with it, but there's something that's off. And those would be sort of like the corollary. And I've run playtesting for video games, but there's parallels here. And so the tech alpha is really like, you get your friends and family together and they play around with it, and it's sort of a little more casual. And then as things start to come together, you're right, it's that you do that A/B testing where you have a group playing one version and a group playing another, and you really can utilize those moments to both build your community, because people who test buy. And you don't want to create this situation where you're burning through this valuable feedback, because they do it once and they enjoy it, they'll do it again. And then you continue to sort of build up, and then you add, elements. Basically every game that I've ever worked on, has the elements of a good tabletop game, right? You've got classes, you've got, environment, you've got a monster to fight and a boss and all this good stuff, and a mystery to solve. I really think that playtesting is maybe an aspect of tabletop roleplay that could do with some more love and concepting.
So the main problem with playtesting on tabletop is that it takes time, and these things already don't make a lot of money for the amount of time it takes to put into them.
Right.
Which is why I think, we playtested the heck out of the Fantasy Age core rulebook, because it's a core rulebook. It's important that we get not only the basics, but the changes right. When I'm writing an adventure, I will frequently not playtest the whole adventure, because if I'm like, okay, well, here I'm going to have, if I was doing a modern age adventure, and I'm like, okay, these are specifically heroes at this tier, and this encounter they're going to run into just some bad guys at this tier, because I specifically want them to shoot the bad guys and take a note from their pocket. Good chance I don't playtest that. The risk from that is that if I don't playtest it, I may well present a situation where the heroes who are up here go, oh, we just hit them with a flamethrower and leave their burning corpses. And then, of course, the note doesn't get out to them.
Yeah.
I will also say, from an independent point of view, for an independent creative, it can be hard to find playtesters early on. One of the things, if you can find a community, and that's why I talked so much about finding a community in the last thing, is that sometimes you can find people who will trade playtests with you. So you'll say, hey, I've got a group, you've got a group. I've got 3 encounters I'd like to have playtested. I will send those to you for you to send me your notes on your playtest. You send me something and I'll playtest it with my group. And then we both have the benefit of another group running through our stuff. We can send notes, and then we also get to see how the other person is doing something, which can be a good learning experience.
Today's tabletop consumer is really, I mean, consumers in general have evolved in such a way that we really were able to, with some introduction and some very well written, hey, we want you to do these things, hand over stuff and let them do their thing. You know, I would highly recommend Reddit as a place to say, hey, you know, I want to run a playtest on this thing that I'm doing, and would be happy to trade playtests and all of that. Alex says real quick, I think this is important to note. A playtest can be used to see how balance works out for an encounter, and when you run it multiple times, you see how others react to it. And there is something very, very interesting about watching it happen. But I find that tabletop gamers are very good at assembling their opinions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the flip side of that, right? If you, I've done a lot of great big play tests, so this is something that it's easier to find actually in a big play test than a small play test. But like I ran I, for several play tests, I've run things, and I'll get a piece of feedback that says, "Hey, this class is entirely broken. This class did absolutely
Mhm.
everything. They could never fail at anything, and the player always rolled the maximum result." Well, if the player always rolled the maximum result and there's nothing in the rules that says they're always going to roll the maximum result, then the rest of that feedback is now irrelevant.
That's right.
Unless I need a constant maximum result to not make you look powerful, which it would be possible I was designing a game to do that. The flip side of that is you'll get someone like, uh, we were playing this and we realized that swords didn't do enough damage, so we tripled the damage of all the swords, and this fight's not hard enough. Well, you're not playtesting what I gave you to playtest. You're
That's
playtesting your house
right.
rule where you've tripled it. And I know these things sound obvious, but they happen all the time.
Well,
So,
yeah, and they'll sneak in. Like they'll sneak in, and people say this was just so easy, and you're just agonizing over what happened. How did I, you know, like this just doesn't quite clock with what I anticipated, and it's because they were doing something or something unanticipated, not necessarily what the playtester thinks is
right.
going wrong. Yeah,
Yeah,
something.
Stan leaps in with a very important note. Make sure you ask the playtesters the questions you want answered. They'll tell you the other stuff anyway.
That's right.
And that's very true.
Yeah,
So we're
yeah.
wrapping up towards the end of time.
I
So
know we are. Yeah.
if anyone wants to get in another question towards the end, this is the time for it. And sadly, not many players know how to provide game feedback. Yeah, but you can. I mean, literally for the fantasy age, literally for the fantasy age core rulebook, I put together a questionnaire where I say like, "Hey, did anyone in your group play an envoy? If so, please answer the following
It
questions."
was great. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had more than one survey where people, did anyone in your group play as an envoy? No. What do you think of the envoy's balance in a socialism situation? And then they read me all these paragraphs, and I'm not saying I ignored them, but I certainly kept in mind no one played an envoy. The flip side of that is on a playtest, uh, this is the end of time. Yes,
This
Stan.
is yeah. Yeah.
These are the end times for this show.
When we don't see
Uh,
you, you stop existing, and we
right.
just
If I am trying to play test a game and I put it in a new class and I had 150 people play test it and no one decided to play that class, that is a piece of feedback too. So you both need express feedback where you ask the questions, you get it, and you need a filtering skill. And I'm talking about 150 people for an independent creative, especially starting out. You're probably not going to have 150 people playtest anything you do unless you are much better at putting together massive groups of playtesters than I was early in my career. But the same principles apply. Just be aware that these things we're talking about, if we're talking about 150 people, you'll get 10 of these responses. That means if you got 5, you might not get one, but be aware it might be hidden and sneaked in there. So,
you as well. Keep safe. Hey, I also want to say real quick, when you're doing these play tests, it is think of it as marketing. Think of it as engagement. The experience these folks have is one that they will take with them, and they'll either leave feeling really good about the opportunity or real cranky about the product. And you know, and we can get into talking about NDAs and all that stuff later. But yeah, so wow, I can't believe that we blown through an entire hour.
oh yeah,
You know, and I feel like you know, when you think about the stuff that we've covered, and we've really literally been doing this for a couple of years, haven't we? Wow.
that seems impossible.
You're welcome, Alexis. Thanks for doing a second video. My question for both of the folks who are listening, whether you're hanging out now or are picking us up on demand, and to Owen is, what are some areas that you wish Stan wants the director's cut. Um, what are we missing? What are some things or topics or subjects that we should consider for a future show as it relates to, even maybe very specifically about like Age Creators Alliance and getting ready to do that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll get into that. But folks, is there a piece that you are like, oh, I wish we would discuss, or I wish Owen would share some of his advice or thoughts around. And if it comes to you at like 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to give you Owen's phone number, and you can give him a ring. He'll probably be up.
Yeah, do, because at 2 o'clock in the morning, if I don't want to answer the phone, it can't bother me. So if you've got my phone number and you want to call me at 2, feel free.
But yeah, so is there, when you look back on your career, is there something that you're like, oh gosh, I wish we had, or I wish I had known, or
So there is, and I don't know if it's exactly what we do for this show or not, but there was this very frustrating moment for me in my career where I was successfully able to pitch magazine articles and web book articles and AOL content articles, to give you some idea of what we're talking about.
yeah,
I could find the contact information. I could reach out. I could say I want to do this thing, and I could get paid 5-6 cents a word, whatever it was. But I could not figure out how you went from that to the person that got to write a 64-page book. There's this moment between I have proven I can do this, and I'm doing this for people, and people reach out to me and ask me if I will do a thing for them, and I could not for the longest time. In fact, I never figured out how to breach that gap. What happened was I got hired at Wizards of the Coast, and the D20 system was launched. And when I left Wizards of the Coast, there were 1,000 companies that wanted D20 system experts, and they all started asking Wizards, and Wizards started giving them the names of those of us that knew the system but had left the company. So I never figured out that breach. It just happened. But there is a gap there. And I would have loved for people to be able to talk about things you can do to breach that gap. That said, the kind of thing that I was doing in magazines, I think, is the sort of thing that, since they're, Dragon and Dungeon and D8 and Shadis aren't all on magazine stands where gamers can just pick them up as they want or buy anymore. So I think that doing things like the Age Creators Alliance and the other community content projects may be one of the possible stepping stones into the industry. And it still might be worth at some point having a conversation about, hey, I've done one community product, I've done 8, I've done 20. At what point should I be pushing to do something beyond that, to go on to see what skills I think I need to develop?
right.
But I don't know if that makes a good ThursdAGE show. So
I
people,
I think it definitely is crunchy, and people like to get into the weeds and to have that kind of dialogue. But Dee brings up something very interesting to me. The idea that speaking to players, they kind of have it easy. They got to learn the system. They can kind of sit there, but they sit there and stare at the GM. They're like, okay, now what? And I can see for a new GM that could be potentially overwhelming. So we should think about, sort of getting your game face on. And interestingly enough, we might want to even talk to a couple GMs and people who are like, that's what they do and that's what they love, and sort of get a sense from them. Maybe even have them on the program.
I think that's a great idea, at least potentially.
Yeah, at least potentially. Yeah, exactly.
At least potentially.
Yeah.
After an hour of talking about this, and I had an hour meeting before this, so I've now been staring at the camera for 2 hours. You're not going to get me to agree to anything for sure, but potentially.
That's right. That's right. Well, how about this? Why don't we wrap and say, Owen, thank you so much. Really appreciate being able to sit down and sort of pick your brain a bit. Of course, always just so fond of our chat and the folks that come and hang out. Always a hoot, and you giving us some thought, some things to think about for the next program. As always, if you've got something that's sort of like you need some advice, you want us to focus on a topic, you want us to stop focusing on a topic, send a note to letsplay@greenronin.com, and we'll read it at some point in a future measure of time.
Yeah,
But,
we're not doing this show for ourselves. I'm doing it for myself because I like to hear Troy's voice. But beyond that, we're doing this show for you. So whatever, if you want to know how can I find big cheap plastic terrain to put on my tabletop, and you want us to tell you about where we find big cheap plastic things, ask us that. If you want to know what
Yeah.
my best pumpkin carving techniques are, we will have that discussion if you ask for it. So
Maybe you have this fantasy age, like on page whatever, there's something and this creature, with the five eyes, there's only four, or, whatever it is. Like, let's get into it. Let's get into it and ask those questions. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great remainder of your week. Stay safe. And, we are here on Monday with Mutants and Masterminds Monday. We got some big stuff coming up, but we're also going to be at Gen Con. So we're trying to figure out whether we're going to do like a Moo Mam Sue or Saw or Sue or Thu, or we'll figure that out and let you know. But if you're going to
ooh,
be at Gen Con, what was that?
sorry, Johanna is doing their first Fantasy Age game tonight. Tell us how it goes. Send us
Yeah,
a note. If you have any
yeah,
questions, any problems, let us know and we'll cover it in the next show.
yeah. Well, and also, I'm hoping that I gave you some adequate tweetage. I will check and that to make sure, and I'll tune in as well to see how you're doing, and looking forward to that. So that's really great to hear. Thank you, everybody, for the kind words. And one other thing we might want to mention just off the cuff, we do this Friday night. Yeah, we are going to put on our oh my gosh, our belts. And we're going to put our hair in a top knot, and we are going to
Were you
set
trying to
the
come up with the
frame.
word Mawashi? Is that what
Yes,
happened?
damn it, a Mawashi. We're gonna put on our Mawashi, and we are going. It'll be Owen, Stan, myself, and we are going to talk sumo
Yeah, we're not
tomorrow.
kidding. We're going to talk sumo tomorrow.
For real, 10 p.m. Pacific. We're going to talk about the current basho, which is the, why am I forgetting it? The it's not
Natsu,
it's not the nigiri basho.
Natsu Bashu,
Not
Basho.
yes, yeah.
And Stan is squirming to hear us both pronounce things. So it's the sumo show. It's me and Stan and Troy. You can find links to it on all of our social media.
It gets
If you have
spicy.
any interest, we're not kidding. We're talking about actual Japanese sumo. If you like the sound of our voice,
Nagoya, I knew it.
Nagoya Basho. See, I was wrong. Not only did I pronounce it badly, but I was just flat wrong. Come listen to us and see us talk about how crazy things were on day 11.
Nagoya Basho. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Stan, who is our sommelier.
Sommelier.
There's sommelier. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Love it. All right, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.